our course, that as we were speaking in the course and also in the interchange with Arlene and Tracy, in fact, we are realizing that we are creating a kind of subdiscipline in science diplomacy that is focused on neuroscience. So we may start to speak about neurodiplomacy. And so, well, we always wait about 5 minutes to start and to allow most of the participants to join the meeting. So I may say, well, let's start at 35 past 9. And okay, so there are a lot of, okay, good morning. Well, the messages in the chat. And so, okay, shall we start? ¿Te parece, Guillermo? ¿Empezamos o esperamos un par de minutitos más?
I think that we can start now. It's a good moment.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Now I'm going to present you Dr. Tracy Bell. Tracy Bell is professor of pharmacology at University of Maryland School of Medicine and director of the Center for Epigenetic Research in Child Health and Brain Development. She obtained her PhD in neurobiology from the University of Washington. Tracy Bell is very well-known and recognized neuroscientist in the United States, and her research focuses on the role of perinatal stress on brain development and also as a risk factor in neurodevelopmental disorders and neuropsychiatric disease. She is also recently was elected to be the current president of the International Brain Research Organization. So this is the main reason also why she is among us. And thank you, Tracy, very much. We are very honored of your participation in the course. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria and Guillermo. And this is just such a great way to start the day with all this young energy involved and interest in making sure that diplomacy is something that as neuroscience we think about. I think now more than ever, global concern for everything from ethics to inclusion and diversity to just really high quality neuroscience is important that we think globally. As Maria said, I was recently elected in 2020 as president of EBRO, and I'm going to spend most of my talk going through some of the opportunities that EBRO has and things I've learned about global engagement. And then at the end, I guess we have time, Maria, for questions as well, which I hope that we have a lot of interest in all of the activities. Certainly EBRO as a global organization only exists in order to help support global neuroscience. And that goes from everything from training to opportunities to travel, to conferences, to support local organizations and grassroots efforts. So I hope if you don't and aren't involved in EBRO that your interest will increase after my presentation. So let me share my screen here. All right. because we're all getting experts at Zoom presentations. Get rid of the meeting control so I can see you. So as Maria said, that I am the current president of EBRO. EBRO is an organization that is just over 60 years old. So it's actually older than the Society for Neuroscience by almost a decade. And EBRO it was started, it originally was formed by a group based in Canada, and then it changed its base to and is now currently in Paris, France. We have a small secretariat office comprised of an executive director who is currently Lars Christensen. You may know Lars. He was the previous executive director of FENS. And he moved to our organization to really help us navigate this new directions and trying to ensure that EBRO has clarity and transparency in our mission. That's something we're working very hard on. So we also have several other positions in the Secretariat. Some of you may know from doing work with EBRO, either Tasia Asakawa or Rebecca Hadid. They do a lot with our programs and outreach. Becky does a lot with a lot of the grant submissions, et cetera. And then we have two other staff members who work a lot in the social media realm, which is something that is very important. And we can't disregard the importance in diplomacy and making sure that whatever your mission is or whatever your interest is and whatever you're doing is able to get out into the community, whether that be your local community or the global community. And we all know, depending on your age, how much you're invested in social media, more or less, that's a really critical way. And another lesson that I have learned with EBRO is that, of course, different countries and continents look at social media or use different platforms, and that's something very important to think about as well. So, as I said, EBRO is an international brain research organization. It is the oldest international brain research organization that exists. As I said, we're now currently based in Paris, France. It was established, as I said, in 1961. The real goal for EBRO is to support globally neuroscience initiatives, and that can be anything from programs and such things like diplomacy that we'll talk about today. We also support a lot of schools, whether it be the Latin American training program we'll talk a little bit about, or we have several schools on the continent of Africa, in Asia. So there's different formats and forums by which EBRO supports neuroscience research at all levels. So from young trainees through senior faculty, we have lots of mechanisms to support that. And that's really the main aspect that we do. So we develop, support, and coordinate and really promote scientific research in all fields of neuroscience. And we do that everything from Brain Awareness Week, so that might apply to young elementary kids, to something in the more senior faculty sponsoring a school or a program. So we do that by facilitating and developing international collaborations. We have a large number of collaborations on all continents to help support the initiatives that, again, at the grassroots level, we are really trying to ensure that EBRO is a bottom-up organization and not a top-down. It is not the officers or the secretariat's responsibility to say, here's what you should be doing in your community. Rather, it is through the regional committees and the connections within your communities that determine what the needs are. And we help to figure out ways to finance that. So we provide for assist in things from education, training, research. One of the things we really don't do is fund directly primary research. And that's we can talk about later, but we don't fund research grants. We help with individuals who need research grant funding to try and redirect them, or in some cases help with grant writing skills. These are called soft skills, is something that's become a big focus. Those are areas that we definitely help with. We are very interested in advocacy now more than ever, and engagement and dissemination of resources, I think, is also a critical component of EBRO. I'm always surprised at the different needs around the globe for things like equipment and matching up organizations that have used equipment that they're trying to get out into communities, and communities who need equipment and unaware of these organizations. So sometimes it's just a simple partnership where we can connect people. We do host a World Congress every 4 years. The next one is, as you see here, it's in Granada, Spain. It is September 9th to the 13th in 2023. Interestingly, and of a surprise to me when I took on presidency, is that IBRO itself actually doesn't host the meeting. Historically, for reasons I'm not totally clear on, IBRO itself, unlike most organizations, doesn't sponsor the meeting. Rather, we look for individuals to propose hosting the meeting, and it's the local organizers who put it together and then potentially take the risk and or gain the benefit financially of hosting that meeting. So it's something that, of course, we put a lot of effort and money into, but we ourselves don't sponsor that meeting. So how does IBRO do this? Where does the money come from? Well, first of all, here's our general budget. So from year to year, it varies from depending on our revenue, and I'll explain that in a second. But the expenses tend to be somewhere between 3 and 4 million euros a year. So it's a substantial budget. This just distributes in sort of a pie chart kind of a way, tells you where the different amounts of funding goes toward. You can see we put a lot into our schools. This aspect here that says IBRO Secretariat, that of course is mainly salaries of our staff, but also a large part of this are different programs that instead of being funded through regional committees, which I'll explain in a second, are actually directly funded out of the Secretariat. So that's not, in totality, that's not just our staff salaries. And on the side here, it just kind of explains the similar things that are broken down by here. I wanted to show this just to give you a feel for the money that we have to work with and ensuring that almost all of it, almost 100% of this money goes out into the global community in many different ways to support. And a big facet of what we are really pushing for. When I took on the presidency, I got a lot of feedback from the global community of things that people were very frustrated with about IBRO. The biggest message I received was a lack of transparency and communication. And I find that what often happens with organizations, and this I think is true for organizations and for governments as well, is that when you don't understand how something works, the human brain tends toward a conception that something is not being totally transparent and that something may be amiss. And that is just where we go when we don't understand how something's happening. You apply for a grant and you don't get it, but it wasn't clear to you how the process worked, you're going to jump to the conclusion that it wasn't fair because it wasn't transparent. And that is something that I have spent a lot of time in the last year and a half, almost now that I've been president, working very hard to improve that our metrics are clear, that our processes are clear, that any questions anybody has, any help anybody needs, that we're really improving with that communication. A lot of that really is about communicating with our regional committees. So I'll explain that in a second. This is an outlay of where the different regional committees are. There are currently 5 regional committees, and these are historic in nature. I, of course, didn't establish them. They have been around since the beginning. And they're basically continent-based, give or take. So we have the US-Canada Regional Committee. Why is it not North America? Well, because when these regional committees were formed, the individuals representative of neuroscience in Mexico decided that they would rather be part of the Latin American Regional Committee group rather than calling it a North American. So at this time, it is the US, Canada, and then the Latin American Regional Committee that you are all members of includes Mexico. We, of course, have the European Regional Committee, we have the African Regional Committee, and then we have the Asia Pacific Regional Committee, and that includes obviously more than just one continent. We have Asia, a lot of the Pacific Islands, and of course, Australia and New Zealand are involved there as well. So that's a very large regional committee. We have a subcommittee, which is called MENA, which was formed, I think, within the last decade. This is currently under conversation. So this is the Middle East and North African Regional Committee that sort of carved off countries that were part of a few other regional committees, Africa and Asia Pacific, for a difference in terms of engagement and representation. You can see the distribution of that 3 to 4 million euros is broken down here by percents of the money. This is not formulaic. This is not that we always divide the pot up this way. This has to do with what the applications are asking for and what the executive committee agreed to fund. So for transparency, to make it clear, how does EBRO work and what is the executive committee? The executive committee is comprised of the officers. So the executive committee, meaning who has voting rights on the budget, is the officers. So those are voted on members. That includes myself as president. That includes the secretary general, the treasurer, and then we have the chairs of each of these regional committees. So there is representation globally on the executive committee, and all information is at an annual meeting. Actually, we're trying to increase those meetings as well. So we just had another one. So that all information is getting out and it's disseminated to everyone in the community. So depending on what things are submitted from any given region to your regional committee, and then the regional committee decides what they want to put forth for a budget approval. And so this is how the budget last year was divvied up. What this doesn't tell you, and I think it's important to note, for instance, is that while 6.3% of our budget goes to the US-Canada Regional Committee, a large portion of US-Canada Regional Committee budget actually funds programs that bring in from underdeveloped and developing countries a lot of trainees. So there's a lot of interaction between the US-Canada Regional Committee and LARC. And there is, just as an example, the Latin American Training Program, the LATP, and some other organizations, that a lot of this money here actually gets spent outside of and brings individuals in for other training issues, whether it be the Canadian Neuroscience meeting or the Society for Neuroscience meeting, just to give you an example. Where does the money come from? The majority, if not all, come from our society journals, the majority of which comes from our society journal Neuroscience. So if you are deciding where to publish any of your neuroscience research, if it is an opportunity that you have, supporting our journals supports EBRO. That revenue through a contract with our publisher Elsevier brings that money back to EBRO, and that is all of the money that goes out into the community. So the journal Neuroscience is the majority of the money, that the revenue that we take in every year. And then our newer online only journal, EBRO Neuroscience Reports also. So I'm advocating for support of both of those journals because they support all of that we do globally. And for those who don't know the regional committee involved in Latin America, or LARC is what we abbreviate it as, I wanted to introduce the members to you quickly. So our current chair, who was just voted in and took over, is Adrian Palacios from Chile, Gabrielle Britton from Panama, Martin Camarada from Brazil. We have several members, actually 3 members from Brazil right now on the LARC. Newton Canteras, Elaine Del Bel are all from Brazil. Caroline Escobar Briones from Mexico, Gustavo Mur from Argentina, and Ana Silva from Uruguay. So if you know any of these members, or even if you don't know any of these members, please do connect with them. They are your input to EBRO, questions that you have, wanting to know how something works. And really importantly, the part that I want to highlight for everybody on here is that the funding mechanisms that EBRO has. This is the reason that we exist. It is to advocate and promote all of these aspects of which we fund. So if you are interested in sponsoring a program or a school, if you are a young trainee and you are interested in traveling to a conference or getting training in a particular area, please go to the EBRO website. There are so many opportunities out there for you. If you are interested in engaging with your regional committee, there are also ways to connect with them there. And my email is very easy to find. I'm happy to answer any questions. You can either ask them at the end or shoot me an email, and I'm happy to figure out ways to help. So of course, EBRO is very interested in diversity, equity, inclusion. It is a passion of mine to ensure that we are inclusive at all levels. What does that mean? That means if somebody is sponsoring a school that is funded in part or in total by EBRO, we have very clear metrics, not just that the attendees at the conference or school are diverse and inclusive. And that means globally, gender, and underrepresented minorities as well. But that means those who are lecturing, those who are participating in the training, all of the above. And I think too often in the past, it has been underrepresented in a lot of those aspects. And so this is something that we are becoming very, very big sticklers on. So if you're going to propose something, making sure that the trainees attending whatever it is you're proposing can look up at that podium and see representation is very important. We sponsor all kinds of meetings, conferences, symposia, and workshops. We have these great fellowships, some of which are called Return Home. So if you are a trainee that has traveled abroad and you would like to return home to engage in research back where your home was before you left for your training, then we have Return Home fellowships. We have exchanges, science of learning fellowships. We have all kinds of schools and short courses. Those include things in Europe, the US, Asia, Canada, all over the place that we have financing to attend or to put on. We have short stay programs for different career stages. And again, depending on your career stage and what you want to do, we have all kinds of research grants and travel grants as well. This just gives you an idea of sort of the funding level for some of these. This is not in total, this is just to give you a flavor. So if you are already a scientist and you're interested in some aspects, as I said, we have these Return Home fellowships, and those can be somewhere around 20,000 euros, which is a pretty nice amount. In the past, this is just what we've funded in the past. These are not numbers that are always the same. This is just what we've funded in the past. Some of these are through the Secretariat, and some of them will be through your regional committees. So these will help support researchers to train overseas. Some of you may be very interested in educational and learning aspects. And so these are partnerships from IBRO with the International, the UNESCO and Bureau of Education, Science and Learning Fellowships. So this is part of the IBRO's Science of Learning. This is something that many of you may be interested in. So we fund a number of these each year as well. I think the applications were just awarded this year, so you'd have to apply for next year. You can, again, all of this is listed on our website. We have early career awards that allow supplemental laboratory funding for various projects, again, largely through the regional committees. International travel grants. Those deadlines are open multiple times throughout the year, including times for traveling to the SFN as listed on here. SFN usually funds about 30 of these in partnership with IBRO. This year, they're only going to fund 15 due to obviously conflicts of what happened last year with COVID and a big cut in their revenue. We did convince them, and SFN has always been very gracious in helping us finance travel to their meeting. And then of course, upcoming travel to our World Congress. And we fund usually somewhere around 100 travel awards to attend the World Congress, which will be in Granada, Spain. So in addition, we have for younger trainees, so there is an additional aspect. I mentioned the regional committees. We also have what's called Young IBRO. And Young IBRO is made up of there's actually a picture of our Young IBRO committee down here. Zelka Krznik is the current chair. She's from Croatia. This is actually a picture of our members of Young IBRO standing on the balcony of an apartment that IBRO has access to in Naples, Italy, where they're holding a meeting. If you're interested in global neuroscience and you want to be a part of this, Young IBRO is a great way to get involved. It is predominantly assistant professor level young neuroscientists who are interested in global neuroscience. It is a way for us to engage with young, talented neuroscientists and get them involved in the IBRO community. It's highly likely that as, for instance, Zelko rotates off being chair, that she will get involved in her regional committee and then possibly one day as an officer for IBRO. So we like to ensure that the engagement is maintained. I also want to say that at the level of young trainees, being part of the IBRO family and advocacy at all levels is something we're very passionate about. So if you, for instance, have a travel award, we want to keep you engaged in the IBRO community. We've invested in you. We want to ensure that you have access to other funding mechanisms and mentorship. So that is something we're working on with our regional committees to formulate ways that all individuals, no matter where you live, have access to clear mentorship and guidance, whether you're at a young graduate student level or assistant professor level, that you have someone to talk to help with career decisions. So for organizing schools, et cetera, we have global engagement seed grants. Those allow organizations and groups that would like to conduct anything from advocacy and awareness events. I'm going to show you in a minute that both the global engagement seed grants and Ebro Dana Brain Awareness Week grants, these are nice ways to gain some funding if you are interested in advocacy in either of those. And I'll show you in a second. Yeah, I'll come back to that. We have when the deadline is and how to apply for those grants. Some of our other advanced training mechanisms we have that might be relevant to some of you and your interests. You know, the CAHAL Advanced Training Program. CAHAL has become relatively more independent in the past year now, but Ebro, as well as FENS and the Gatsby Charitable Foundation, help finance these advanced neuroscience training programs. That includes the ones that are located at the University of Bordeaux and the Champlamade. So these take place every year, although COVID has definitely had an effect on these. Please look them up if you're interested. These are incredible schools and opportunities, and there are lots of funding travel mechanisms if you're interested in attending those schools. We also have 2 schools on the continent of Africa, one that is in Morocco and one that is in South Africa. They have different courses that are ongoing, some of them related to things like understanding different types of computational neuroscience. There are some advocacy-based things, a lot of bench types of science also. There are lots of mechanisms to support travel to those training schools. And there's also advanced training schools at Riken in Japan and the Institute of Neuroscience in Shanghai. So you can see that a lot of money goes out into the research community for training at multiple levels. And then of course, there's the LATP and the Latin American Neuroscience Training Program, which has been a strong partnership that has been ongoing for many years between the Grass Foundation, SFN, and sponsored in large part by the US-Canada regional committees. As I told you earlier, there's been some issues in the past with SFN and how this moves forward with funding, but fear not, this is such an important program. This will continue. We will find mechanisms to ensure that the LATP continues and that this funding mechanism allows individuals to travel to North America, either to the US and Canada, and receive training and attend the neuroscience conferences. So these are relevant to LARC, so your regional committee. These are from last year. These are actually the funding mechanisms in part that were funded out of LARC. So if you're interested in something, you can apply through your regional committee as well as to some of the mechanisms I just mentioned. So for scientists and for organizers, we have things again like these travel grants that allow you to attend any number of courses and workshops around the world, short stay grants, which is basically a training lab visit within Latin America, exchange fellowship, which is allowing PhD students that can learn different research techniques, and then this LARC Pro Lab to foster scientific collaboration. If you want to organize, these are examples of the Ebro LARC school proposals that exist within Latin America, and then of course short courses, workshops on any number of aspects, whether it's advocacy or soft techniques, hard techniques, etc. There are ways to, again, connect with your regional committee prior to budget submission. I think those calls are going out right now. So around global engagement, again, we have these seed grants. The deadline is fast approaching. If you are interested, please go to the website. These include the Ebro Dana Foundation Brain Awareness Week grants, as well as the Global Engagement Seed grants. And so those deadlines are coming up. They are posted on our website. It should be very clear if you're interested how to apply for those. And if you have any questions, let me know. There's also a way to contact the Secretariat, which is, if you're interested in nitty-gritty details of the how-to, probably best you ask them. They'll have more information than I will. I want to make sure that it's really clear that one of the big aspects that we are engaged with and ensuring representation is that the reason it's so important to increase the diversity. I think many of you are aware that the way that Ebro was formed out of membership within largely North America and within Canada and parts of Europe, that as an example, it's a 61-year-old organization, and I'm the first female president in 61 years. So what that speaks to is that we have a greater need for inclusion and representation at all levels within IBRO's organization. And that is something that we are absolutely advocating and pushing for, including our diversity representation, that hearing from all levels, that IBRO exists to especially focus on underdeveloped and developing areas that really need the most support and the most assistance with advocacy and support for neuroscience research at all levels. So that is something that we are working very hard on. You should hear more of that coming up. And around this topic, we have a lot of global coordination. So at our World Congress in 2019 in Korea, we held a really impressive high-level forum on neuroscience and the future of education and learning. That was a very impressive meeting that existed, and a lot of aspects that came out of that connected people globally around education and the importance of the brain in science and learning. We have a lot of the International Brain Initiative. We have partnerships with everything from the IBI, the Global Science of Learning Education Network. I mean, it's just endless. I'm not going to go into all of them, but they're all available on our website of all of our different partnerships we have around the globe around this point of advocacy. We also have the Kamali Foundation. Many of you have heard of the Kamali Prize. And this is Dr. Who won the prize in 2019 or 2020. I'm forgetting which years. They all run together now due to COVID. We also sponsor a school with the Kamali Foundation that is hosted. And there's just a lot of advocacy that comes out of the Kamali Foundation toward inclusion. And I just want to end with, before I take questions, that inclusion and global advocacy and diplomacy, global is important, of course, but we can all start locally as well. And so I want to just mention, I know that Maria introduced me as also being the director here at the University of Maryland in Baltimore of a Center for Epigenetic Research in Child Health and Brain Development. And that's a long title, and it's basically a way of saying that things in the environment, either preconception, during pregnancy, or in early life, across the lifespan, really affect the brain. They affect how the brain develops, the rate of which it matures, and the way in which we all respond to our environment across the lifespan. And so my center, when I left the University of Pennsylvania and moved down here 4 years ago, the idea was to incorporate basic research, making it translational. So taking basic researchers and partnering them with clinical researchers and vice versa, but also to ensure that we were engaging with our surrounding community. So I just want to make sure that on a global scale, we're also thinking locally, that we also recognize that diplomacy begins at home, and that engaging with our local community, ensuring that wherever you live, that you are ensuring that the research that you're doing or the aspects that you're interested in are engaging with your community. Because if they aren't supportive and knowledge based within what you're working on, it's very difficult, to take that to a bigger level. So I am in the city of Baltimore in the US. Baltimore is a majority Black city, meaning there is the majority of the population in the city of Baltimore is African American. There are a lot of discrimination issues historically here, a lot of issues with being marginalized, discriminated against, that have left to generations of trauma and stress that we are currently facing issues with, especially around education and health. And so there's something that we engage with, because of course that affects the brain, and of course it affects the brain generationally. It's something that we're very interested in. So I wanted to just give a shout out to how that's important locally in engagement strategies, whether it be engaging in your community through enrichment activities. Some of you think of this as outreach. I try to use the word engagement more than outreach. Outreach suggests you're doing something to or at or for your community rather with your community. So I think engagement's a nicer word, especially if you're a member of that community. We do a lot of science and society events. And so that really hits the community at multiple levels, depending on what your target is, whether you're talking about, this is actually a Greg Dunn, for those of you who follow neuroscience art. Greg Dunn was a former graduate student of mine, and he does neuroscience art. If you've ever seen any of the beautiful work he displays at the Society for Neuroscience meeting or around the world, actually, this was a piece that I commissioned actually from Greg to really talk about how the world and the environment affects the developing brain. And so this is actually hanging in my building here in the lobby in Baltimore. This is actually on the right is me hanging out at City Council in the city of Baltimore. This is Zeke Cohen, who's a city council member. And I connected with Zeke. Zeke was interested in trauma and developing the Baltimore City Trauma Care Act, which basically informs all city at all city levels, whether it's healthcare, incarceration, policing, education, all levels, the effect of trauma on the brain at all ages across the lifespan. And so it's something I've been working with Zeke to educate city council about the brain. And this on the top here is actually our former mayor in Baltimore. And he came and interacted in a school activity that we did, which I'll show you in a second. So one of the things that I've been doing is building relationships within our community to talk about neuroscience. And again, whether I'm talking about the work that I do for IBRO around the world, or whether it's here in Baltimore itself, this is actually after a full year project that we did at one of our city schools. This here is, I don't know if you can see my arrow, but I'm pointing to an artist that worked with me in developing a program we called Reading in the Brain. It was really educating kids about the effect of the environment on their brain and the positive benefits of reading, because who doesn't love to read? This was actually the principal of the school. And this here is our dean of our School of Medicine who participated. This is actually the president of Baltimore City Schools who got involved in this program as well. And this, of course, is our kids that were some of our leaders in this program. This was one of our city schools that we worked in. Baltimore City Schools are not in great shape. As you can see from this picture, if I were to show you the inside, you would see even more. The water fountains are capped because the water is not safe to drink. They are struggling schools. We worked with this school for a year in a program with these kids, with the administration, with the community. We had a lot of community events and evenings talking about the brain, talking about the effects, why it's still important for young kids. The brain doesn't stop developing when you give birth, et cetera, et cetera. And we did at the end of the year, we took all of the concepts that we'd worked with these kids on, and we created a mural, as you can see on the outside of this school, which really then engaged the community about the importance of the brain. As you can see, little neurons flying all over. These are actually the kids in our program and depicted in this mural. And this mural was painted on by every single child and faculty member in this school. So worked on throughout the course of the year, which is then, we took excerpts of this and I brought it into the university. And so these are excerpts from the mural. And so you can travel to the floor we do neuroscience research on, and you can see the effect in the community, just to remind everybody every day who we're doing research for, so we don't get our blinders on and just sit at your bench thinking about research, that you remember the community as well. So these are the kids. They actually traveled to our university, and they did a whole program at the bench as well. These kids loved every minute of participating in science. And I don't want to end without mentioning ALBA. So if you are not already a part of ALBA, if you haven't signed on to the diversity, equity, and inclusion, please sign on. ALBA is a network started by Carmen Sandy. It started really with advocacy about inclusion for gender representation, and it's just really expanded very quickly to be all inclusion. But it speaks volumes toward the need for ensuring that neuroscience representation, that we're all involved, we all have a seat at the table and are respected. And so I like to say it's nice that a lot of science conferences, for instance, will have an after hours social or an after hours advocacy piece for gender representation, or why equity and inclusion is important. But we need to see people at the science podium as well. And so that is something that IBRO ensures. If you're going to submit something for funding a school or a program, whatever, I want to see what that inclusion looks like. It's not just the after hours, but the actual noting that gender representation, underrepresented minorities are also the face of neuroscience as well. So with that, I'm not going to go through all of the ALBA network. You can look them up, sign on, get involved. There's a tremendous amount of work being done globally for that. So thank you very much for your morning attention. I'm happy to take any questions. Please follow us on Twitter. This is my lab, but we do all kinds of advocacy locally, as I said, and globally. This is the eBros Twitter handle, and of course, Alba's as well. So Maria, do we have time for any questions?
Thank you very much, Tracy, for such an amazing presentation. That is very clear how IBRO is involved in the science diplomacy from the beginning. And well, there are a lot of comments and some questions. Well, many thanks and congratulations for the talk. Here, Erika asked about the research grant opportunities for new PIs in Latin America. And I think that you have already shown the instruments that IBRO has in each region, including Latin America.
Yeah, I see some comments here for education. I just want to give a shout out, Maria, to absolutely. IBRO is not just bench research support, but it's also very much about education. So please do, if you're interested in support for those sorts of mechanisms, look on the website.
There is also a question from Daniel. Daniel, would you like to make pose a question by yourself or?
Okay. Congratulations for your work. My question is very easy. IBRO has worked on use related to advanced in neuroscience and their impact on negotiation process. For example, emotional intelligence, soft skill, the social brain process in adaptive intelligence. I'm referring to the study of the functioning of the brain in the process of interpersonal relations, negotiation, for example, the impact of cybernetic society of learning. What is the work, the IBRO in these areas?
Daniel, that's a really good question. I think that's something that so are you asking in terms of grant support or schools?
Work in neuroscience and their impact on negotiation process, social process, for example, emotional intelligence, soft skill, the social brain process, or the adaptive intelligence.
This is, I agree, an incredibly important area of neuroscience at many levels, but we fund hundreds and hundreds of different schools and programs, workshops around the globe. So I can't give you examples of every one of which those might be most relevant. So if you're interested from the point of attending something, I again would go to the website. There's places where there is advertising for different things that are ongoing that IBRO has supported. If you're interested in hosting something, then go through the different grants and opportunities there and see which opportunity might best fit your interest. So as I said, and every country and continent hosts different things all around the world, Daniel. So there's tons and tons of stuff that might fit within your interest. Everything from neurodegeneration to, who knows. And then we also spend a lot of money funding travel awards to attend all kinds of conferences that might relate to your interest as well.
Okay.
I certainly couldn't go through them all.
Okay.
Yes, I really encourage everybody to apply for IBRO grants. We have, we have been awarded several times. In fact, right in this moment, we are in a school, Latin American school on neuroscience and artificial intelligence, and we will be organizing another that is in October on brain and mind evolution. So it's really kind of possible to get support for strengthening the neuroscience in the region.
Yeah. So Maria, what you're saying, and based on Daniel's question, it occurs to me that one of the difficult, as I said, the social media tends to be one of our main mechanisms to get information out. However, if you are not on Twitter, for instance, if Daniel was interested in a particular type of course, how do we, and it's a complicated question of how to ensure that globally people are aware of opportunities. And I'm always open to suggestions.
Well, in fact, during some time, there was only the possibility to get in contact with IBRO was through the media. But fortunately, recently, IBRO started again to send information by email. So,
Okay.
yeah,
the problem
I
is
think
you can't email. The problem is you can't email the world. So the question is,
but it's a more kind of safe way to get in contact with everybody. This used to be some years ago. It was stopped during some time, and we could only get access through Facebook at the beginning, then later Twitter and other media. But now we are receiving by email reports every some months and announcements also. So I think the email is a good.
The problem, of course, that we have is if we're not ensuring that we're updating our lists. And some people retire and new scientists come on board. So that becomes sort of the limitation as well. But I'm writing myself a note, Maria, to remind our secretariat to again, it's thinking creatively of how younger trainees tend to access social media in a different way than, for instance, you and I might.
maybe you should think also in the possibility of creating some spaces like Slack or any other kind of like this.
Yeah, my lab uses Slack. Do you guys use Slack?
Yeah. We are using.
A Slack channel might be something that's helpful.
Well, there are some more questions, but I think that we should start with Arlene's presentation and then leave some space for questions at the end.
Yeah, okay? I'll read through these. Sure, go ahead. Of course.
Okay, thank you. Well, now we have also a great pleasure I am very happy to introduce you also to Arlene Sayes. Well, Arlene is a senior researcher in philosophy at the Center for Research Ethics and Bioethics at Uppsala University and director of Neuroethics program at CAF, Centro de Investigaciones Filosóficas in Buenos Aires, Argentina. She is tenured professor of philosophy at the Universidad Argentina de la Empresa, Buenos Aires, Argentina, and is also affiliated to Weill Cornell Medical College, New York, United States. She is deputy leader of the Responsible Research and Innovation Work Package of the European Union flagship Human Brain Project, where she is a researcher and leads the task Neuroethics and Engagement. She is also board member of the International Neuroethics Society and serves as a member of the International Brain Initiative Neuroethics Working Group. Arlene received her master and PhD in philosophy from State University of New York at Buffalo, United States. Her current research focuses on neuroethics, particularly normative, epistemic, and ontological implications of neuroscientific findings and its application, including brain-inspired artificial intelligence. So, Arlene, thank you very much for joining us, and I hope everybody would also enjoy your presentation. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's a treat to be here, and I'm really looking forward to discussing some of the issues. As I'm sure it became evident, my take is from the humanities and the social sciences. So I will be talking about some of the probably some of the points that Tracy made, but from probably a slightly different perspective. And it's a tall order actually to follow Tracy's talk, but I'll do my best. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, I hope I can. Let's see.
We are seeing your screen, so it's perfect.
Do you see the first slide?
Yes,
but
yes.
We are having some problem. You know, we are seeing the first slide, but in a big screen. I don't know if it's
Yeah, that's good.
That's good.
That's good.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yes, perfect. Yes, thank you. I was asked to tell you a little bit about neuroethics in the International Brain Initiatives, and it is really my pleasure to do so. Of course, if you would like me to later on focus a little bit more on neuroethics in the HBP, I will be more than happy to do so, because again, after all, I am at present an acting leader of the work package responsible research and innovation in the HBP, and of course I'm very familiar with what we are doing in the HBP with regards to neuroethics. But I was thinking, as Tracy was talking, actually she finished with what I take to be a really important insight when talking about diplomacy, because Tracy said diplomacy is not just diplomacy bridging nations or global, but it also is bridging, I think bridging communities, bridging groups of people, even locally. And I think that some of the work we're doing within the neuroethics in the big brain projects has a lot to do with that, has a lot to do with thinking and engaging specifically on a number of issues and trying to bridge not just nations, but also particular groups of people who are affected by neuroscientific research. So see. Sometimes I have problems doing this. Okay, so I think that the best thing that I can do is tell you a little bit about neuroethics, what neuroethics does, what we are doing within the big brain initiatives, and then tell you a little bit about our activities in the IBI, that is the International Brain Initiative Neuroethics Working Group. And I will finish actually with our activities in engagement, because engagement appears to be particularly relevant to diplomacy. So we talk about neuroethics. I will explain what neuroethics is, but probably before talking about what neuroethics is, we can start thinking about what is it about neuroscience that triggers the development of a discipline such as neuroethics. So the interesting thing about neuroscience is that, as we all know, it increases our understanding of the brain, what we are, how we behave. In fact, if you look at the mission of most of the brain initiatives, at some point, the brain initiatives, be it the Canadian Brain Initiative, the Australian Brain Initiative, the European Brain Initiative, or the American Brain Initiative, they will say at some point, well, in fact, the knowledge that we're seeking will entail further understanding of what human beings are and how they behave. So there is this goal to understand what we are and how we behave and really what it means. And of course, in the process, neuroscience is supposed to shed light on a number of important topics, such as how do we think morally? What does it mean? The fact that we can make a moral decision, that we can determine that some things are right or wrong and act accordingly. What does it mean? How can that happen? Free will, are we really free to choose, or are we not? And as we know, the issue of free will becomes, and what neuroscience, or whether neuroscience can contribute to the discussion over free will, is getting attention, particularly because of some attempts to use neuroscientific evidence in, for example, courts and trials and so on. There is also there is a significant portion of neuroscientific research that also seems to not target, but definitely have some implications on human and personal identity. And again, that raises the issue of what are humans, or what is to be me? What does it mean to be affected or not by certain invasive procedures, for example? And the issue of moral responsibility as well. So it is interesting that on one hand, neuroscience appears to not only, or by trying to tell us what we are, is also addressing issues that some people would even say are philosophical in nature, such as moral responsibility, identity, free will, and so on. But of course, neuroscience also enables the development and the use of novel neurotechnologies, such as deep brain stimulation, different forms of non-invasive neurostimulation, neuroimaging, neuropharmacology for non-therapeutic uses, and of course, enhancement comes to mind, and so on. So it seems evident that there is a lot of interesting things that can be done with neuroscience, but of course, there are some people will say problematic, or at least some implications that need to be addressed. For example, one is the possibility of just saying, well, my brain made me do things. Some people believe that further knowledge of the brain might alter how we understand free will and responsibility in a variety of settings. So we could easily say, well, it wasn't really me, it's my brain. I'm not really responsible to that extent. A lot of people are showing a lot of concern regarding mental privacy. Something that the big brain initiatives are doing is using massive amounts of data. And of course, data is data that is taken from people. And this is many times, I mean, we're talking about neural data. So many people are saying, what happened with privacy? What happened with that domain that we thought we were completely protected from any interference? And suddenly we see that there is this possibility of really knowing, or at least there is this attempt to try to know what a person might be thinking. So some people are quite concerned about the possibility of potential threats, potential and actual threats to mental privacy. And another concern that is raised is, again, as I suggested before, can the type of knowledge that enables neurotechnologies alter how we understand humans? And what is the meaning of this? Would it have further implications? So the interesting thing about neuroscience is that it is obviously, any neuroscientist will say that whatever he or she does, he's doing it for the good of humanity, right? So this idea of benefit is very important, and nobody would deny that. Nobody would deny that neuroscience, neuroscientific research, and developing neurotechnologies are going to benefit humans in a significant way. However, though, and by the way, this means the following, we could say. Neuroscientific knowledge is valuable in itself. So somebody could say it has intrinsic value because after all, it is good to know more about us. It is good. Even if we don't use this knowledge for anything, it is good to know better what we are. So in that sense, we could say, well, neuroscience and the neuroscientific findings have intrinsic value. They're good in themselves. It's good to know more. But a lot of people would say beyond that, they have instrumental value, because the more we know about the brain, the better we will be at diagnosing people, the better we will be at providing prognosis, and the better we will be at treating disorders. And after all, we do know that brain disorders are prevalent. So there is a sense in which we can say there's no doubt that neuroscience is extremely important. And what neuroscience can give us is both intrinsically and instrumentally valuable. But of course, this does not mean that there might not be some issues that need to be addressed. I don't even want to say at this point concerns, because concern appears to kind of necessarily entail that these are negative things. And again, we might want to be open. Say, okay, there are some issues that neuroscience raises. There are some implications of neuroscientific knowledge, and it would be good to address them. We cannot just sideline and say they're not important. And this is when neuroethics plays a role, because neuroethics, it has an interesting, very short history. In fact, we can say that the term neuroethicist had already been used in the 1970s or so to refer to those who had to address ethical issues in neurology in the clinic, though. It was not a term that was used very often, but it certainly existed. Now, neuroethics, as the discipline it is, as this field of research, if you want, we can say is born in 2002. There is this interesting conference in San Francisco organized by the Dana Foundation, and its president, William Safire, at the time, this is 2002. So again, as you can see, this is not really very long ago. He defines neuroethics as the examination of what is right and wrong, good and bad about the treatment of, perfection of, and unwelcome invasion of, or worrisome manipulation of the human brain. So this is an interesting definition, and it's interesting because what Safire is putting on the table is the possibility that more knowledge about the brain may make it possible to manipulate the brain, to perfect the brain, to make it better. And this is not necessarily good. It may not be necessarily bad, but at least there are some issues to be addressed, right? So this is not the only definition, certainly not the one that probably at present is the most widely used, but historically it is an interesting definition. And since then, there have been a number of authors, neuroethicists, trying to provide more clarity as to what neuroethics is. And honestly, even today, there are books coming out, being published on what is neuroethics exactly? What kind of field is it? Is it bioethics? Is it philosophy? Is it neuroscience? What is it? So we cannot say that there is absolute consensus regarding neuroethics, but still, though, there is some agreement on what neuroethics does. And we can say that one agreement is that it is pretty multidisciplinary. So within the neuroethics domain, you're going to find some people who have done neuroscience, others who have done philosophy, others who are psychologists, others who are in the social sciences, and so on. So we can say that there is some multidisciplinarity in neuroethics. It attempts to be interdisciplinary in the sense that it attempts to provide knowledge that is a result of this convergence of different interests. And we can say that when it comes to content, it studies the practical and conceptual questions that arise when scientific findings about the brain are carried into philosophical analysis, medical practice, legal interpretations, and health and social policy. Because the fact is that, as we all know, neuroscientific or research about the brain doesn't just stay at the level of research. There are implications. It is used. There are applications. So neuroethics is going to focus on potential implications of those applications, what it means to go from the lab to the clinic, or from the lab to commercialization, that application part that is so important. So what type of work do neuroethicists do? Now, this is an interesting question because there is, for a while, there was the assumption that neuroethics was mostly to focus on responsible conduct of research, compliance mechanisms. It was another type of applied ethics. It was another type of just approach that looked at the issues and applied ethical theory to say whether some things should or should not be done. And again, the assumption was that probably the main area of concern for neuroethicists had to do with how neuroscientists behaved in the context of their research and so on. By now, there is consensus that definitely this is not all that neuroethics is. In fact, I would even go further. There is consensus that that is just the tip of the iceberg. Is just an important part, definitely, but not necessarily something that captures everything that neuroethics does. Why? Because neuroethics also focuses on how empirical knowledge of the brain can increase our understanding of human beings and human behavior. That is a topic of neuroethics. What are the implications underlying the research, and what are the implications underlying the interpretation of findings of findings of the research. Neuroethics also discusses how neuroscientific knowledge is constructed. Why does it have explanatory power? Why does it have normative power? So there is some consensus today that neuroethics is not just another applied ethics that focuses on the brain, but it goes a little bit beyond. It has a strong philosophical component that it often is sidelined in common day discourse, but in fact is very obviously there. So neuroethics, in fact, or neuroethicists, certainly do normative work. They identify ethical concerns. They reflect on how to manage them. And these ethical concerns, again, may go from how do we protect neural data to, again, is cognitive enhancement correct? So those are the kind of discussion where one is going to apply a number of ethical considerations to decide whether something is good or bad. That would be normative work. But in addition to normative work, neuroethics does empirical work. It collects data on the necessary facts. It looks at the science. And in fact, in many cases, some of us are lucky enough to be able to really do research with the scientists on a number of concerns. Is beyond the normative, there is empirical work, and fundamentally, there is conceptual work. If we are going to be concerned with whether neuroscientific or whether neuroscience might be a threat to privacy, it seems that we need to understand what privacy is. What kind of privacy interest is at stake? What is the concern? Why is it a concern? So there is an important conceptual work of trying to shed some light on notions such as privacy, personal identity, humanness. Again, lately in particular, there has been quite a bit of talk about the extent to which some neurotechnologies will change us, alter our humanity. Alter our humanness, what it is to be us. Okay, what is it to be us exactly? Many times some notions are taken for granted, and neuroethics very intentionally attempts to put those notions on the table and try to examine them and try to see what they are, what they mean, how should we use them. There is a critical examination of conceptual assumptions, and again, examination of the translatability from lab to applications, as I said before. So it is important that, as I stated, there is a concern with how is the knowledge being applied. So interestingly, neuroethics has been very much supported by the different international brain initiatives. Interestingly, probably not surprisingly, interestingly, because one has a tendency to think that, well, if there is a project in neuroscience, that project probably is not going to be thinking about neuroethics and ethics. But in fact, what we have seen, and I can talk, for example, about the Human Brain Project. The Human Brain Project, from its inception, from the very beginning, at the planning stages, it was decided that part of the funding, part of the budget was going to be allocated to research in ethics. And I specifically highlight the term research. It was not the idea that, oh, we need to have an ethics committee. No. The ethics committee actually is external to us. It's external to the Human Brain Project. There is in the Human Brain Project, and there has been in the Human Brain Project from the beginning an area, in fact, when in its origins, this was known as a pillar. It was a pillar, and the name of the pillar was Ethics and Society. And right now, again, things have changed, and now we have moved to responsible research and innovation, ethics and society, and so on. But the bottom line is that in the HBP, in the Human Brain Project, there was awareness from the beginning that the project was likely to raise a number of ethical, regulatory, philosophical, social issues that needed to be addressed, and they needed to be addressed by including the insights of people in the humanities and the social sciences. So it is the case that today in the Human Brain Project, this group of people, 20, 25 or so, they come from the social sciences and the humanities, and they address the issues, of course, together with the neuroscientists, the engineers, and so on. But it is interesting to see that neuroethics is very present in the Human Brain Project from the beginning, but we're not the only ones. In fact, US Brain also has an important neuroethics or neuroethical or group working on neuroethics, and neuroethics working group. They have been extremely active in writing and in contributing to the global discussion on ethical issues raised by these big brain initiatives. I added the Korean Brain Research Institute initiative, the Korean Brain Initiative. They also want neuroethics to be a key part of the initiative. Japan Brain Minds, also there is a lot of interest in neuroethical issues being addressed seriously and systematically. The Canadian Brain Research Strategy as well, with Judy Illes, actually, who is one of the well-known neuroethicists, the Australian Brain Alliance, and actually one of the people you had here on Monday was Linda Richards. And Linda Richards, of course, is in Australian Brain Alliance and a big fan of neuroethics and engaging with the issues, ethical issues, social issues, regulatory issues that brain research raises, and so on. So, and of course, there is a China Brain Initiative emerging. There is, as Marita discussed, a Latin American Brain Initiative. So not only are there 6 existing large-scale national brain initiatives that are being sponsored around the globe, but there are also more local, regional initiatives, and they represent together an investment of over $7 billion. And it is interesting to see that among all this, and of course, they are very ambitious because, again, they are focusing on one of the most complex organs we can think of, and the implications are huge. They're very ambitious, but there is also this sense of, okay, we do need to be careful, and we do need to have people thinking and to engage with these issues that might be raised by the research. So this is just to show you some of the articles that have been written within the last 5 years on neuroethics at the brain initiative level. For example, the contribution of neuroethics to international brain research initiatives. Actually, the journal Neuron, as I will comment later, devoted a whole a section of an issue to neuroethics in the different brain initiatives. So I will make the point a little bit later. The International Brain Initiative, in fact, is the result of this widespread recognition, we could say, that these brain initiatives could maximize the impact of their science, reduce potential redundancies between them, tackle common challenges, and so on. And the important thing about the International Brain Initiative is that it highlights or it identifies neuroethics and public engagement as high priority. So we can see in the Declaration of Canberra, this is December 2017, it specifically says the global brain initiatives recognize that neuroethics is a key concern as citizens, policymakers, and various communities are increasingly confronted with very significant advances in capabilities in gathering brain data, in neurotechnology, and in artificial intelligence. And they also say, the initiatives therefore commit to collaborate in the fields of neuroethics, agency, responsible data stewardship, and cerebral privacy protection. They also commit to engage in a meaningful dialogue with citizens, patients, and all relevant communities to understand their concerns and communicate transparently on the opportunities and challenges arising. So it is interesting that this puts neuroethics and engagement at the forefront in this debate. So Through the IBI network, the brain initiatives have collectively agreed that neuroethics can empower scientists to do their best, their more impactful, their more socially beneficial work, rather than just being a policing mechanism. And this is important, as I said before. Unfortunately, there are times in which neuroethics is misconceived as just kind of an ethics police, let's say. And yet representatives in doing neuroethics in the different brain initiatives have already agreed this is not what neuroethics is, nor is it the way in which neuroethics should be seen. And in fact, this consensus aligned with the goals of the Global Neuroethics Working Group. This is a group that has been meeting since 2017 to address common ethical concerns, promote opportunities for ethical reflection, analysis of the issues raised by neuroscience, specifically in the big brain initiatives. So actually we see representatives from Korea, the US, this is me, Japan, Australia, Japan, Canada, Karen Montojo is from the US, Korea. So what happened at that point? The idea is that since the goals of IBI when it comes to neuroethics are aligned with the goals of the Global Neuroethics Working Group, we became the IBI Neuroethics Working Group. So we have a mission to, and of course, I'm not going to read all this because it's quite long, and actually, of course, this is available, but I can tell you more or less that one of the important things about the Global Neuroethics Working Group and its partnership with IBI has to do with the extent to which it calls for international collaboration, and it looks for again, I want to repeat the term, joint collaborative work in not only addressing, in identifying the issues that need to be addressed, thinking about them and situating them contextually, because this is an important aspect. Not all cultures understand issues in the same way, nor do they apply frameworks in the same way. So one of the things that the group is calling for is this cultural and contextual awareness of how neuroscience can have impact in different societies, and careful reflection, but joint reflection, international reflection shaped by as many contextual considerations as possible. And of course, there is a timeline and there are products. And this is an important aspect of what we do, because we give ourselves some specific times to produce deliverables. So the first deliverable was a paper, Neuroethics Questions to Guide Ethical Research in International Brain Initiatives. This was published in Neuron. And the premise here was the following. Again, if you look at the title of this paper, Neuroethics Questions to Guide Ethical Research in International Brain Initiatives, the premise was the following. Neuroscientists, engineers, people who are doing the research they obviously have not received any training in ethics, which we know that is a fact. So it's not necessary that they do not want to engage with ethical issues. They might need some guidance. They might need some guiding questions. So as they do the research, they can begin to understand the implications of the research beyond the scientific impact. And that's why, again, we met and we discussed a number of issues, and then, of course, we continued online and so on. And we published this paper where we identified 5 main questions with sub-questions that we think should be the starting point for a discussion on neuroethics in the big brain initiatives, but also in any type of brain research initiative. So, and among the issues that we thought or we think is important to keep in mind is, for example, how will the research impact or reduce autonomy? Are there potential misuses of the research? And if so, what are they? And so on. So this was a first deliverable, and it was a very fruitful, productive starting point for a number of discussions. A second output actually was a number of publications in an special issue of Neuron devoted to neuroethics, which I mentioned before, which outlined the broader scope of the field and its application for guiding research in the big brain initiatives. So for example, I can show you the table of contents, and I don't know whether it's probably too small or whether you can see it, but you see that there is actually a paper from each of the big brain initiatives. So people who are working in neuroethics and neuroscientists and so on in each of the big brain initiatives got together and engaged with the issues and provided a review of how their respective projects were addressing some of the questions we had identified in the first deliverable. So again, that was a very useful exercise. But it became evident to us that the next task was to move beyond the questions. I mean, we can talk about questions and what are the questions that we should be addressing and what are the questions that we should be discussing. So, of course, that's always possible. But the issue also is to lead to some kind of action, implementation. How do we move forward? After we identify the questions, how do we move forward? And we thought that, in fact, in order to promote implementation, engagement is key. So an engagement with who? Engagement with the public, or let me be probably broader, engagement with different publics. Not only policymakers, not only other scientists, not only people who are in the humanities, not only with people who are in the social scientists, engagement with patients, engagement with the regular citizen who many times is even paying for this research, at least partly because of this, some of the research obviously is funded by tax money. So the idea was to say, if we really want a true understanding of the ethical issues raised by the research, and if we really want true action when it comes to managing those issues, we cannot leave this at the academic level. We really have to engage with the public, and we have to really be as proactive in this sense as possible. So this, of course, leads to how to understand engagement. And again, I think that the notion of engagement with, of course, Tracy mentioned before, but the notion of engagement plays a key role when one is talking about neuroscience diplomacy. Engagement is key and promises to become an even bigger issue as time goes by. I can tell you that in our project, the Human Brain Project, the importance of engagement has been very evident from the beginning, and that is mostly because we follow what is known as the research and innovation framework, and the research and responsible research and innovation framework puts a lot of emphasis on the need for engagement. So engagement understood as what? First of all, engagement understood as bi-directional, mutual, interactive dialogue between science experts and public audiences. And I think this is a key role, because sometimes there is a tendency to understand engagement as a one-way street. So I engage with you if I tell you what I'm doing and you listen. So I engage, I communicate it. So, well, am I not doing engagement? Not really. That's not really engagement. That is a one-sided communication. And that's why this type of engagement that we have in mind and that we believe in the IBI Neuroethics Working Group, we believe the type of engagement that is important is different from what is known as the knowledge deficit model. The knowledge deficit model takes as a starting point that if people do not trust science, if people do not follow the science, that's because they don't know any better. They don't know. So what we need to do is provide information. This knowledge deficit model is being sidelined at present because it is a little bit inadequate. True engagement has to do with really listening to publics, to different publics as well, having a conversation, as I said before, a dialogue where each is shaping the other, because it is, in fact, the belief also that the public's concerns, and again, by public, I have a very broad understanding of public, diverse publics, not just one public, diverse publics, but the concerns of different publics can very nicely, and actually they should align with the concerns of scientists, and if possible, they should shape, or they certainly could shape, the scientific agenda. So the idea is that to move away from the knowledge deficit model and to really see engagement as bidirectional, mutual, interactive, and so on. And the objective of public engagement is to provide support, to promote trust, to enhance understanding of science on one hand, but also to empower publics, to make them feel that they have a say, that there is something, that they are also part of this. Keep in mind again that one thing that is becoming, I think, at least one tendency that is becoming more common lately is to understand science, and certainly neuroscience as part of science, is something that needs to be done with and for the public, for different publics, or with and for society. So I think that that is an important aspect that needs to be emphasized. And engagement as a two-way street, as a bidirectional exchange, definitely is more likely to promote support, trust, understanding, and to empower than a model that is just communicative without without creating a space for debate or for conversation. So, so then what about neuroethics and engagement? Well, we believe that in fact, the topics that neuroethics engages with, again, serious enough, are could be a very nice entry point for engagement. If we really want to engage different publics, we think that trying to address neuroethical issues with different publics might be really the way to go. That's a very nice entry point for discussion, for engaging, for promoting more interest in neuroscience as well. So neuroethics and engagement, when we think, and this is a work in progress at present, but what we're thinking of at present is neuroethics and engagement entails being proactive rather than reactive. Again, engaging before, not after. Seeking value alignment. I already talked about this. Societal and scientific values should be at least compatible. After all, again, science is already embedded in a society. So, and science is not neutral and fully objective. Science, even the questions that science asks are already shaped by certain frameworks. So it is important not to think that there are no values in science, or the argument is only epistemic values in science. Yeah, of course there are epistemic values in science, but there are also ethical values, social values in science, and those should become evident. So it is important in this goal for more engagement and for more ethically responsible and ethically engaged societies, to see whether it is possible to align scientific values with societal values. And engagement, neuroethics and engagement also means awareness of situated impacts. Again, not all findings or not all neurotechnologies will impact people in exactly the same way. To a certain extent, it will depend on where they are, who they are, a number of intersectional issues that we have to address. So, and importantly, though, neuroethics and engagement, and this focus on engagement, also tries to promote researcher awareness and researcher engagement, so that neuroscientists do not feel that ethics is external to them, but rather that it is internal. One thing that we have been promoting in neuroethics is the idea that neuroethics makes neuroscience better. And it's not, but this is making neuroscience better, but it's not an optional type of better. Good neuroscience should be responsible neuroscience. Good neuroscience should be ethical neuroscience. There is, of course, a tendency usually to separate the scientific value of something from the ethical and so on. And we're trying to say, but really, does it make sense to make such a distinction? Why not try to really embed ethics already in the scientific agenda? So in fact, it is enhanced. And then we can truly talk about excellence in science. So what does this require then? It requires open dialogue between neuroethicists, neuroscientists, neuroethicists and neuroscientists, neuroethicists, neuroscientists, and other publics. And it requires identification of common goals. So it requires work. So I'm going to finish. And of course, a rich view of communication. As I said before, bidirectional, not just only one-sided. So I would like to finish just with this question. Can neuroethics be used as an entry point for science diplomacy? Again, if science diplomacy is understood as trying to use science to try to bridge nations, again, or communities, could neuroethics be a way to do so? So with this, I finish. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to discussing some of these issues, and you can follow me in Twitter. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Arlene. It's really also a great pleasure to have your talk. In fact, we are very aware of the importance of neuroethics in what we do, and since some time ago we are including neuroethics in all our courses in Uruguay and also regional, because we are very interested in promoting the formation of new generation of neuroscientists in neuroethics as they are becoming neuroscientists. So, well, there are also a lot of comments and
Marita,
congratulations.
Sorry.
Yes?
It's only in order to try to bring both presentations that were very, very enlightening to the issue of science diplomacy with neurologists. I have two questions, if I can make for you.
Of course.
One for Arlene is, what are I am convinced of that, but I think it's important to hear from you. What is important to have a neuroethics framework, international framework, I mean, because I was thinking, what happens if I make a framework in Uruguay and we don't make the same framework in Argentina? What means that, and what are the challenges of this? And I'm thinking that is the main avenue to have science diplomacy in order to try to bring out these international cooperation solutions. And in the case of Tracy, I was thinking, she mentioned that it's a very old institution, well, not so old, but it's not a new institution. And I was thinking, what things changed? What are the challenges that was moving? Because since the beginning, IBRO was an international science diplomacy institution in some sense, since we are not thinking on science diplomacy in that moment. But now I think, or I suppose that the agenda changed and the challenges changed, and so IBRO, it has to move from some kind of institution to a new. So I think that it could be good to hear from you what you think that the new challenge of science diplomacy that was changing in these years.
Okay, should I start with neuro rights?
Yes, please, Arlene.
Yeah, as you know, there is right now at present, there is a push for adopting neuro rights. And actually, this is something that even the UN is considering at this point. And it has to do with what is by now is known as the Neuro Rights Initiative. And probably you all know that Rafael Schuster is the driver of this initiative. He's a neuroscientist also with the US Brain Initiative. But probably it is fair to give credit to also two philosophers who talked about neural rights in 2017 already, and actually even Rafael Schuster will mention them many times. And the underlying idea is that indeed, considering the potential threats of neurotechnology, we should have a framework that is a universal framework, as Guillermo said, a universal framework, and what best than a human rights framework. And so the idea is that probably different countries should try to adopt and include at least, they identify five main neural rights, but at least some of the most important neural rights, such as the right to mental privacy or psychological integrity and so on and so forth. And then, as I said, they're trying to respond to your concern, which is, well, if each country is going to have a different framework, that could be a little bit difficult. So I think that the idea is to have a universal framework, kind of probably similar to what some of you might be familiar with, the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights, right? So we all know that it's there. So that's the proposal, which is not to say that it's not uncontroversial, though, for a number of reasons. One of the main concerns has to do with the potential rights inflation. That is, the idea is we already have a number of human rights. Couldn't we use those rights to cover some of the potential threats by neurotechnologies? And so it seems to me, again, this is an ongoing discussion, and this promises to become more and more time. I mean, I'm sure that even some of you here know exactly what I'm talking about, but it promises to become more engaging because of the issues that are being raised. But it seems to me that here the issue is the following. The concern is how neurotechnologies might threaten human beings. So I think the first thing to be identified is exactly what would be threatened. What are the interests that would be threatened, or that will be threatened, or that are being threatened right now by neurotechnologies? Once we identify interests, we can then decide what are the appropriate legal instruments that can be used to protect those interests. So for me, it's a question of interest protection. How do we protect something? And the question for me still is whether new rights is the best way to protect, which is not to say that I'm against them. I'm not saying, no, we shouldn't have new rights or neuro rights. No, we might actually need to have them. But I think that we still need to talk a little bit more about other instruments, why they wouldn't work, because the step of actually including in the different constitutions new rights it might be important, but I think one has to be sure of what one is doing, and one doesn't want the right in the Constitution, then nobody pays attention to it either. So I think there is also this, we have to be aware that there are a number of things, but I'm not in principle opposed to that at all, the Neuro Rights Initiative, but I would like to hear more discussion on it. And as to end, as you know, Chile actually is the first country and the only country, this is a pilot case. Chile is calling for a constitutional reform where those rights will be adopted and for a specific bill protecting those rights. So we are, actually Representative Gerardi is the one who's been the driver for this, together with Rafael Schuster and of course.
He's going to be here the next Monday.
Okay, so you will, and of course he will tell you exactly what they are doing and why, and yes. I know that he's extremely concerned with what neurotechnologies and AI can do and so on. So again, to finalize, I am not against it, but I think we need to talk more about it.
Many thanks, Arlene. I don't know, Tracy, do you want to say something, answer?
I would love to. Could you sort of give me a reminder of this? So you were just asking what has changed, Ebro?
That Hebrew evolved. I assume that Hebrew as an institution evolved from 1961 to now, and the challenges were different. And it was always an international science institution. So in some sense, it's always an institution of science diplomacy. But I think that it's good to know, for your perspective, what were those challenges in that moment, and now what are the challenges that you are facing with IBRO? If there's the same or not.
Surely the world has changed in 60 plus years. I think when it started, it was a very focused, had a sort of a limited vision of the organizations that existed back then for neuroscience globally that it was going to engage with. And I think that has dramatically changed, that the level of neuroscience and the breadth of global neuroscience has changed. I think that on each continent and each country, the issues, COVID is a great example, access to resources. If you look at the vaccination rates alone, you can think about how that's just a very specific aspect that we've had to deal with for those countries that have had plenty of access to vaccination and those that have not, and how that changes our ability to host schools and programs, because that's going to be an issue of who can attend them. I mean, look at the Society for Neuroscience meeting. There's been a huge question posed that if SFN is not going to require vaccination and not going to require masks, how does that impact the neuroscience community? Who will attend? Who will remain virtual? It's something that they're dealing with. So I think that's something just very specific, Guillermo, to answer your question about how has neuroscience or EBRO changed. EBRO, as I said at the beginning, the leadership was almost entirely male, almost entirely from Europe. That has changed just in this last year and a half. I think with ALBA, and where we're also working with the World Women of Neuroscience, just really speaking out about the importance of equity and inclusion and the value of that diversity that brings, that diplomacy and that advocacy is something that is one of our pillars. And I think that has absolutely changed in 60 years for sure. But I think it changes year to year, Guillermo. And I think that thinking about what is influencing just on your continent right now, the government and the stability, that how can EBRO help neuroscience and schools and programs and travel when the stabilization within different countries is not clear, is something that changes year to year, and something that we feel very valuable to the organization of how we can support the trainees and the different aspects of neuroscience. I would say a lot has changed in 60 years, and that's going to continue.
Tracy. That was I'm trying to bring back the issue of science diplomacy, because we are working on the relation between science diplomacy and neuroscience, and we have, as you may know, here with the students, let's say, of this course, we have half and half, people from neuroscience and people from diplomacy. And I think that this case, it's amazing to show how science diplomacy is needed to improve science, but also to improve the life of people. And as Aline says, in this two-way communication, it's not only bringing the knowledge from the sky and from the highest. You need to bring this new community.
It has to be for EBRO, it has to be bottom up. We can't dictate what the organizations need in their own regions. It has to be communication within that region, and how we can help formulate those discussions. I see Elaine on here, and I know that she will smile when I say that within regions, it has to be, the communication has to happen for how it supports, again, speaking from an EBRO perspective, the neuroscience societies and organizations and the members of a regional committee, of which Elaine happens to be part of both. But that's communication. I mean, at the end of the day, it's communication. It has to happen. And it has to be, here's what our needs are. Here's what our membership has determined. Here's what we're asking for from EBRO, not for EBRO to say, here's what we think you should do. I think that's the wrong way to go about it.
Okay, Marita, I don't know, maybe we can bring up 2 or 3 questions and
yes,
close.
maybe we can open to some of the questions and comments. Jacques, I think it was for Tracy. I saw, but I don't. Jacques, maybe you want to pose your question directly. I don't find it now. So many comments and okay.
I have to say that I love the fact that this community is so engaged and so
very active.
That's great.
Okay, and also Arlene, that it was with my name because I entered with my link is Arlene says no, not Arlene. Ellen Del Bell says 2 questions. Each neuroscience society group pays IBRO an annual fee calculated according to the number of members it has. First, is IBRO aware how much each member pays to each society? There are societies that charge around $5 for students and $20 for seniors. Second, if the society receives nothing from its member, does IBRO should receive from this society? That is maybe it's a more internal question.
Yeah, so I just will answer that. The membership, so I explained in my talk that we have an executive committee comprised of the elected EBRO officers and the regional committee chairs. We also have what's called a governing council. And so everything that is put forward from the executive committee then goes to for final approval from the governing council. The governing council is huge because it is comprised of representatives from all of our membership. You as an individual are unlikely to be a specific member, but rather by which you are a membership of. So for instance, if you're a member of Falan, if you're a member of SFN, if you're a member, all of those organizations, and some of which are more private and some of which are foundational, pay a membership to EBRO for representation on the governing council. And that governing council membership vote is based upon the size of the organization. So SFN is our largest member. They pay more for a membership fee, and they have a larger number of vote representation, as just an example. However, as I showed you, our revenue, which is almost entirely based from our journals, so that membership fee you're asking about is such a minimal part. It really only establishes a buy-in. We're committed as an organization to EBRO, and that's why we pay our membership fee, but it's very minuscule relative to anything that we do. And we have a lot of agreements. There's a lot of organizations that don't actually pay their membership for reasons that are complicated I won't get into. So to answer the question, no, I don't know who actually pays, for instance, for Falan or SFN or whatever. I don't know who pays their membership fee. That's not really something that affects how we fund or finance within the regional committee budgets.
Okay, thank you. Well,
it's such a small part of our budget that it's not worth taxing. In fact, I sent out a letter for the recent budget call and the payments for membership fees, that because COVID has hit so many countries so hard, that we're actually requesting if people we can't pay our membership fee this year because of COVID, we're accepting that this year. So we'd rather work with organizations and continue their input and engagement than to turn them away because they can't pay their membership.
Thank you, Tracy. There are some other questions, but maybe one is related to if there is, from Guillermo Gutierrez, if there is any collaboration between IBRO and multilateral health organization like World Health Organization or Pan-American Health Organization?
I don't know specifically about that. I don't think so, but there may be other ones that we work with in partnerships or that we're working on, but I can't give you all the specific names at this time.
Okay, I know it's collaboration with International Bureau of Education of UNESCO that you mentioned, but I don't know.
UNESCO for sure.
Yeah.
So I will say that partnerships is something that we are working strategically on right now, because anybody who publishes knows that Gold Open Access or Plan S challenges the way in which our revenue stream could occur. And so we're working very hard to ensure that we don't suddenly lose all of our revenue when the Gold Open Access goes into play. Because if Elsevier goes open access, we could lose easily, immediately, up to 75% of our revenue. So we do have an investment account that is long-standing. And so we're working on ways to build both our partnerships for increased revenue to fund programs, as well as other investment strategies so we could draw revenue off of those investment accounts. Otherwise, IBRO could just vanish.
Thank you, Tracy. Also, there are several comments and questions from Marisa related to science, neuroscience education, and for example, if there is a database of resources for neuroscience education, and that, well, suggested that it would be interesting to have a place where it can be published kind of educational resources related to neuroscience. So I don't know if in IBRO there is any place in the web page where there are publication of educational resources. This would be the question.
So funny you should say that. So one of the things we're working on right now is revising many aspects of both our social media. So I wrote down some of the suggestions I got from the chat. Slack, I think, is a great one, because you can have channels in Slack, and then you could have sub-channels for different people's interests.
Yeah.
But I also, we're working on some changes in the Secretariat, and one of those will be somebody who has expertise to keep up on and make our web page, because if we can't reach you, then maybe you can reach us. And so having those resources easily accessible is something we're working on.
Okay, thank you.
Arlene was trying to say something, I think.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Or not?
Sorry, no. Yes. Yeah. No, I was looking at some of the questions, and I
yeah, this is
one that I think is Guillermo Gutierrez. He says, do you think that the complexity of neuroethics will generate not one but different global instruments that could be referenced for national laws or strategies? I was thinking in the OECD recommendation of responsible innovation. Yeah, the thing with the OECD recommendation is recommendations is that they are just recommendations. So and one thing that I think that we have been quite good in general at identifying the issues and providing recommendations. So I have to give credit to the Neuro Rights Initiative in that they are saying, okay, let's now focus on implementation. And when it comes to implementation, we might need to go beyond recommendations. We might need something more specific. And if we know that there is a right to this is likely to result in more clear actions than just recommending. So I really like the OECD recommendations. I think they're really good, but it is true that probably they require more to make them actionable. Whereas the Neuro Rights Initiative might in principle be more actionable. What I'm saying though is that, and again, to a certain extent, I'm summarizing some of the bibliography there is on this and criticisms to this. But first of all, even though it is true that all countries recognize a number of human rights, some people feel that the human rights framework is too Western oriented. The narrative is very Western oriented, so they do not necessarily feel comfortable with, or they might not feel that they fit nicely into their cultural narrative. So I think that there are a number of considerations that we need to address before actually saying much more about neuro rights. So as I said before, I'm not against them, but I think more discussion is needed, and that discussion will have to be shaped also by cultural considerations. So I hope, Guillermo, that answered your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
There is also another question from Juan Gomez that is the use of data analytics is already a tool used by some companies worldwide to measure modeling and modeling people's behavior. How neuroethics proactively reacts in response to this issue regarded from their ethic and legal aspects?
Well, yeah, I mean, data protection is one of the big issues in neuroethics. I can tell you that within the Human Brain Project, we have an area wholly devoted to data governance. And we have actually a deputy officer that focuses just on data concerns. So yes, I mean, if the question is it an issue that we need to be aware of, an issue that has to be managed? Yes, absolutely. What are the ways? In the HBP we have written, and actually these are documents that are public. You can download them from our website. We have even written an opinion on privacy and data protection, where we address some of these concerns and what are the potential solutions, tentative solutions to some of these concerns. So yes, I mean, yes, it is an issue, and we're working actively on trying to address them and see again how they can be managed from a more practical perspective.
Thank you.
Maybe, Marita, that's the last one, and we can end here, no? Because of the time, I'm thinking. We can give the floor to Tracy and Arlene if they want to say something for the last minute. And if it's not, a big thanks from our part, from here, from the south of the continent.
I would just like to thank both of you for the invitation and the opportunity to engage. I do hope that you will, if you're not involved with EBRO, that you will check out the opportunities on the webpage. Elaine is on here, and she is on your Latin American Regional Committee, as well as Falan. That meeting, Elaine, what's the date for now, the meeting? I know it's been postponed.
17th of September, between the 17th, 18th, and 19th, 3 days, okay? We are going, pardon? This year, Falan will have online meeting just for 3 days, okay? And next year is going to be in September 2007. Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Fingers crossed, everybody. Yes. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Yeah. I encourage you at all levels and with all interest in diplomacy that there's many ways to connect. And so please check out all of the funding opportunities on EBRO's page. Get involved, again, locally and globally, I think is incredibly important.
And I would like to thank you, Marita and Guillermo, for the invitation. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about these issues with you. And I would like to encourage the rest of you to contact me if you have interest in neuroethics and you have interest in what we are doing in neuroethics, because we are very interested in your views on neuroethical issues, how to address them, and also on whether we might be making mistakes or not seeing some things that are there. So please feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Well,
thank you
very
both,
much.
Arlene. Tracy.
Yes.
This has been
Yes,
a
Marita,
great
Marita, please.
morning for the course.
Thank you
Sorry.
again. Thank you.
Well, bye-bye. Many thanks. We'll see you on Friday for the next. Nos vemos el viernes.
Thank
Hasta
you.
el viernes.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Gracias a
Gracias,
todos.
Arlene.
Muchas
Gracias
gracias.
a
Hasta el
todos.
próximo viernes. Saludos.
Muchas
Hasta el
gracias, que
viernes.
estén muy bien.
Gracias, gracias.